Okay, so this is the case study 1, Surtsey Island, Iceland. As we read, you're going to make sure that you highlight details that provide clues, like the event or appearance of different kinds of species, like pioneer species, species that first colonize areas, um, species that come afterwards. Um, we're going to highlight those in yellow. We're going to write comments to remind ourselves how these details connect to primary or secondary succession. They don't have to be long, but just really quick comments. Those will help us answer the questions. Um, and we're going to highlight biotic factors in blue and abiotic factors in red. Okay. In 1963, an underwater volcano erupted off the southern coast of Iceland. Volcanic eruptions continued for 4 years until 1967, creating eventually a new volcanic island that formed with the rock, or that formed rock from the cool magma. And I highlighted that. I'm also going to put a comment because I know that newly formed islands and land is a hint to primary succession because life has never inhabited those newly formed areas. As the magma from the eruption cooled and solidified, the new island developed barren, rocky terrain. I'm going to also highlight this because I remember from my definition of primary succession starts with barren, rocky land. This island, now known as Surtsey Island, is approximately 500 feet above sea level and is not accessible to many humans, other than scientists conducting research on ecological succession occurring on the island. The purpose of strictly prohibiting visits to Surtsey is to ensure that colonization by plants and animals, biotic succession, and the shaping of geological formations will be as natural as possible, and that human disruption will be minimized. It's therefore prohibited or not allowed to go ashore or dive by the island, to disturb natural features, introduce other organisms, minerals, or soil that leave waste on the island. Nearby construction is also strictly controlled. Okay, great. So this just tells me that conditions are being maintained to ensure that ecological succession is occurring naturally on the island. Okay, let's see what happens first. At first, the newly formed Surtsey Island was lifeless. Ooh, that's a big hint because I know that primary succession starts with the absence of life. And I know I already highlighted rocky surface, but I'm going to put, what is the abiotic? Abiotic is in pink. I know rocks are not alive, so they're abiotic factor. The rocky land, not alive. Plants could not grow on this bare rock, thus limiting the habitat for new animals that found their way to the island. I'm going to highlight that as an abiotic limiting factor. The rock did not have the nutrients or things that animals and other organisms needed to live at first. Okay, so let's see how this comes into play then. One of the first colonizers of Surtsey were phytoplankton that surrounded the edges of the island. Okay, so I know that phytoplankton are biotic, and one of the first colonizers, that's a hint that these are the pioneer species. First colonizer. And I put a question mark because I'm not quite sure if it's a pioneer species that eventually lives there or if they're just surrounding the edges. Because technically that's in the water around the island and or on like the outskirts of the island. I don't know if they established life there. Um, Eventually the phytoplankton attracted fish, which consume phytoplankton for energy. And I'm going to put a comment. Biotic factors increase predation, near predation, and biodiversity of organisms that live near the island might bring other things to help make life. Eventually, birds began to visit this new landmass because they were attracted to the fish that were feeding off the plankton in that area. Eventually, visiting birds, mammals, and wind brought seeds to Surtsey Island. Okay, so biotic factor, birds, they bring seeds to the abiotic factor, the rocky island. Again, you should be doing these notes as at the same time that I'm doing them because this will help your annotation grade. However, without soil, again, that's a abiotic limiting factor. So I highlighted in pink. Most of these seeds failed to germinate. Seeds failed to germinate. And I know seeds are biotic, so I put those in blue, and did not develop into plant life. About 5 years after the formation of the island, organisms called lichen and some mosses began to grow on the rocky surface. There we go. So there's primary succession, step 1. Those are definitely pioneer species. So make sure you label those. Lichen are actually made of 2 organisms, a fungus and an algae that stick together and grow through a mutualistic relationship. That's cool, I didn't know that. Although lichens are not considered to be plants, they're still made of autotrophs and are able to produce their own food through photosynthesis. I'm gonna put that in green because it's a biotic factor. Lichens have root-like structures that are able to attach and break down bare rock, and this allows lichen to extract nutrients. Over time, lichen help create a thin layer of soil on Surtsey Island because they break down that rock. Okay, and I'm going to make a comment. Lichen help create soil, and next step of succession. Again, you should be doing exactly as I'm doing here. There's no reason that if you're doing what I'm doing, you shouldn't get a 20 or a 10 out of 10 on the annotation part. As soil began to accumulate or build up on the island, small grass-like plants started to grow, providing shelter for nesting birds. I'm going to highlight that as the next step. Next stage is development of other life. And I'm also going to make a note that this biotic factor helps provide habitats for other biotic factors like living species. Okay. Additionally, grasses and plants provided habitats for insects, which began to establish themselves after being brought to the island with the action of waves and birds. So again, waves and wind, those are abiotic factors. Bring other organisms and life to the island. Increases biodiversity. As the small plants and lichen died and decomposed, if you don't remember what decomposed is, It's just what happens to organisms after they die. Their bodies are decomposed or broken down by bacteria, mold, those kinds of decomposers. The amount and quality of the soil on the island began to increase. So I'm going to put that as blue because that is a biotic factor. So I'm going to write that here. Biotic factor that helps provide nutrients for other living organisms. Approximately 30 years after the formation of Surtsey, the first bush, there we go, there's another species, next step of succession, was seen growing on the island, and that species is a tea-leaved willow. As the grasses and small bushes continued to grow, they often outcompeted the founding lichen and dominated some of the areas of the island. Okay, so that's that competition there. That's a biotic factor equals competition cause lichen to die out. Or I can also put replace pioneer species, because that's, I know, a step that happens in primary succession. As these plants lived and eventually died, they also decomposed, contributing to the developing soil. By 2008, almost 70 species of plants, including this little puffin, were found on Surtsey, along with thriving insect populations, including spiders, and several colonies of nesting seabirds, like those puffins. The emergence of Surtsey Island has provided a unique opportunity for scientists to observe how ecosystems develop and change over time. All right, so now you're going to pause and you're going to, based on your annotations, right, and if you wrote down at the same time that I was, you should have all of these same annotations that I do. So you're going to go back to your questions and answer number 1 through 6 about Surtsey Island. So make sure that you're as detailed and specific as possible, which if you were following along and did the annotations with me, you should have no problem getting full credit for this assignment.